Dobro večer. Televizija Republike Srpske u saradnji sa Republičkim centrom za istraživanje rata, ratnih zločina i traženje nestalih Republike Srpske kreće sa serijalom emisija posvećenih tragičnom periodu u istoriji našeg naroda kroz izvještaj Međunarodne nezavisne komisije za istraživanje stradanja Srba u Sarajevu u periodu 1991-1995. godina. Podsjećamo, komisija je formirana odlukom Vlade Republike Srpske. U martu 2019. počeli su sa radom da bi u oktobru 2020. kompletirali svoj izvještaj. Tokom skoro dvogodišnjeg rada eminentni međunarodni stručnjaci, islamolozi, sociolozi, vojni eksperti, medijski stručnjaci, doktori na naučnoj osnovi su analizirali praktično nestanak srpske hrišćanske zajednice u tom gradu. Tragali su za uzrocima i posljedicama. Večeras razgovaramo sa predsjednikom komisije. Rafael Izraeli, profesor islamske i kineske istorije, autor desetine istraživačkih radova i knjiga iz oblasti islamskog radikalizma i islamskog terorizma, saradnik Jerusalimskog centra. Mr. Israeli, I hope we hear and see each other well.
Well, yeah, more or less, it's okay.
First of all, thank you for your time. And so we can start with the question. Can you tell us, in your view as the chairman of the commission, how can you describe the character of the Independent Commission on Sarajevo and what was its main goal? Also, can you please share with the public your personal impressions regarding the collective labor and the working atmosphere within the Commission during the 18-month mandate?
Yeah, it is a long story. About 2 years ago, we were invited by the government of Republika Srpska to join this committee of 7 members who were nationals of 7 different nations. 2 were from the main powers, America and Russia. 2 were European powers, France and Italy. 2 were from Central Europe, Austria and Serbia. And 1, myself, was appointed the chairman of the commission. So we started to work with 7, and along the time, one of us, the Austrian, had for several reasons to withdraw from the commission, which means that at the end we submitted the report written by only 6 of us. That is all of those minus the Austrian. Now, from the beginning, we had to divide the tasks of that committee between the members, and each one of them had to fill the duties that were more familiar to us. I refrain from saying expert because none of us is expert in anything. We were just scholars who each one observed his own field, and each of us tried in harmony between us to contribute the best he can to the final report of the committee, which included more than 1,000 pages, which shows you how long this very daunting task took during 1.5 years of deliberations and meetings in Banja Luka, and the other part, about half the time, took to write our recommendations and findings until it was completed last October 1920. During the deliberations of the committee, we make sure that not only each one of us has his special field in which he was more familiar than the others. We took our point ourselves to make the necessary recommendations and finding only based on our belief and in our objectivity, as long as possible to be objective at all, because all of us, of course, have their luggage, cultural and political, and we could only do whatever we could. In other words, we don't pretend to be objective, but we pretend to be fair. That is to say, take into consideration all the considerations of all the members of the commission and come together to conclusions. That is the reason why we did not append to any of the chapters of that commission any one of the authors, of the 6 authors of the report. So we took upon ourselves that to be joint authors for all the contents of the conference, of course, corporatively and not singly on each of the chapters separately. Therefore, while we discovered what we discovered, and we'll talk about it in a moment, we insisted that none of us bring in his personal political views, whatever they are, but we remained strictly neutral and fair, as I said before, all along the deliberations and the report writing. Now, as the chairman, I took upon myself not only to assemble the members and to hear the views of everybody separately and to take them into considerations when we were writing the report, but also to assemble thousands of documents that were taken from the archives of Croatia and Serbia and the Bosnian Muslims and all kinds of other committees and museums in order to put together the maximum amount of documents so that nobody can oppose or reject our findings as biased, because we really took into consideration all of them. And so we arrived, I hope, I believe, to some kind of fair document which addresses the needs of every one of the members.
It's clear you did a huge research investigation. So how does the Commission experts team define the character and the nature of the war in Bosnia and Herzegovina based on the all-encompassing investigation and complex approach research process? What were the main strategic goals of War's Party?
Well, in the first place, we had to deliberate very deeply and very contentiously between all the members what was the character of this war. Because, of course, there are two possible versions. One, that it was an international war, because when the war broke out, all the component members of Yugoslavia were already free countries. And that means that these independent countries had an international war between them. And on the other hand, there was a contention that the war was a domestic one, or civil war, if you like, because members of the same Federation of Yugoslavia were fighting among them, especially the three major components of Yugoslavia. That is the Serbs, the Bosnians, and the Croatians. Now, if it were only members of each one of those countries as participating in the war, it would have been easier. The problem is that each one of those countries comprised also a minority of the other two nationalities. And therefore, each one of those three countries which participated in the war, as a matter of fact, had to take care of the same time of each minority nationality that was inhabiting the other country in war. So you have more than 1.5 million of Serbs in Croatia. You have a large majority of 100,000 in Bosnia, even more than thousands, and so on and so forth, which not only conditions the manner in which we describe the war in all its details and all its findings, but also dictated the manner in which the conflict was finally settled in 1995 by the agreement of Dayton. In addition to that, to the complication of very different countries, the three major participants participating in the war, there was also an interference of major powers, maybe the United States of America, the NATO forces, which took upon themselves to make justice, so to speak, but as a matter of fact, they were on the side of the Muslims and the Croats, and they took a very clear bias against the Serbs, and that brought about a travesty of justice in the long run. So this is the contours in which the war took place for 3 unfortunate years, with a number of fatalities and wounded even larger in 3 years than the Middle East conflict took in 70 years, with many more countries participating. So that shows you only the misfortune of this war, which took a lot of time to be settled temporarily, as I said before, and which, to my mind, or to our mind, is due to reopen sometime in the future, because all the components of Yugoslavia, especially those who took part of it, are not happy with the settlement, which is no settlement at the end of the count.
You said, but I have to ask you, can you please elaborate on the role and involvement of United States of America and its allies in the civil war in Bosnia and Herzegovina?
Well, of course, the Clinton administration, I think, made a very, very long calculus of war. And I have here to return a little bit backwards to explain to your auditors the complexities of the war. During the rule of the civil governments in Turkey, that is Çiller, Ecevit, before Erdogan came to power in 1992, the United States was hoping that with the civil governments who were pro-Western and moderate from the point of view of religion, that it will be possible to attach to Turkey all the Islamic countries of Central Asia, Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and all those Stan countries, because they just exited from the Soviet rule. They thought that they could attach them to moderate Turkey and so have the entire Central Asia attached to America. But until they did that very, very clumsy move, which took a lot of time, the government in Turkey changed and Erdogan came to power, who is a fundamentalist Muslim. And therefore, the moment Erdogan came to power, he started to influence those East, Central Asian countries to move to his protection, and therefore to be more anti-Western, anti-moderate, and more pro-Western. And therefore the whole calculation is America, and with it NATO fell into the water because all their calculations proved false. But it was too late to change course, because a big ship like that of the United States cannot change cap immediately upon decision, they deciding it. And therefore they stayed on their course, and they signaled the Serbs, who are part of this trio conflict, as the villains, because they attacked the Muslims and they were accused of causing genocide in Srebrenica and all the others. And during their acts, while they were signaling the Muslims as the saints, because they were attacked, they were the poor guys who were persecuted by the West, of course, they had to mark the Serbs as the villains, and therefore all NATO, all the United States forces, all the bombings of Serbia and Belgrade, and the foreign embassy in Belgrade had to be directed towards Serbia, and Serbia became the hated country. And all that was wrong, because Serbia, on the contrary, while the link between all Orthodox Christianity from the Russian embassy, the Ukraine, and then Holland, and down to Vienna and Greece, were all Christian countries before. Now, with the declaration of Bosnia as a Muslim country, they severed the link between Russia, Central Europe, and Greece down to the Mediterranean, which means that Christianity and Western Europe, as a matter of fact, shoot themselves in the legs in order to prevent Europe from falling into Islam, which will take advantage of them later on in the months to come. They simply wounded themselves and opened the road to the penetration of Islamic fundamentalism, as they did later on, unfortunately. So this is the context in which the Western powers acted in favor of the Muslim under the wrong calculus, as I said before, and in so doing, they had an embargo against the Serbs, who during the war could not get any weapons, while they shipped weapons to the Muslims and to the Croatians via Zagreb, the capital of Croatia. So when you look at the entire picture in that light, or rather obscurity, you see what kind of travesty was done to the cause of the Serbs, and that was the reason why all the members of the committee, in unanimity, we found that a deep, deep wrong was done to the Serbs, and we tried to redress that in our report. Redressing that did not mean to deny the suffering that was done to the Muslims and to the Croats and all those who participated in the war. But what we wanted is to prevent the world from accusing everybody except the Serbs. And as a matter of fact, what we did was to redress a balance and to say those were wrong, but the others also were wrong. And in that complete picture, we hope to our having done the right thing.
In the chapter which was conducted under your guidance, you have identified 4 periods of imported radical Islam ideology that were reinforcing radicalization and violent extremism among the Muslims in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Can you elaborate on this, as well as the creation of regional Islamic infrastructure?
Well, look, it is a long history, and this long presentation, I will give you just the main line. During the rule of unified Yugoslavia, Bosnia, as one part of the federation which pretended to be Muslim or to become a Muslim country within the federation, as a matter of fact, violated the consensus on which all Yugoslavia was built, because all the 5 federations of Yugoslavia, Croatians, Serbs, Macedonians, and so on, Slovenians, were built, all of them, on ethnic differentiations. In Slovenia, there were Slovenians, in Serbia, the Serbs, in Croatia, the Croatians. But Bosnia was the only one who was built on religious group. That is to say, by being Muslims, not Bosnians, they became like a nation of their own within the federal federation. And that was in itself a very wrong concept of Yugoslavia. That is the reason why during this period they call themselves not Bosnians anymore, but Bosniaks. Bosniak. And therefore it makes, so to speak, a differentiation between the various ethnic groups on Yugoslavia. No mention was born in that. But when Yugoslavia fell apart and each one of these federal groups become so to speak, independent, and the Bosniaks become Muslims, and they hailed the slogan of Islam as the ethnic mark of their separate ethnic group, they started to raise the history that they all forgot about during the 30 years of, or 40 years of Tito's rule. And therefore, when we started to discover the history, we discovered that since the 1920s, when Hassan al-Banna in Egypt founded the Muslim Brothers, students from Bosnia started to go to Al-Azhar University in Cairo to study radical courses. They also followed the great Muslim reformists of the end of that period and became their students. And under them also, the Izetbegovic, who was the head of the DNP, became also a fundamentalist Islam. In the early 70s, he even built wrote together what is called Deklaracja Islamska, that is to say, the Muslim Declaration, in which he wrote the detailed platform of the future Muslim party that will rise in Bosnia and create a Muslim state. Fortunately for the rest, he was prevented by the counter forces in Bosnia of the major minority of the Serbs and the Croats who were present in Bosnia, and because they were the majority in the country of Bosnia, he did not have the chance to declare a majority in Bosnia and make it all Islam. And therefore, although they advocated the establishment of Islam, it did not came, as a matter of fact, to prevail in all of Bosnia. Now, during that period of the going and coming of the Bosnian Muslims in Cairo and other Muslim countries, they established an entire movement which in the 30s and 40s was called Al-Hidayah in Arabic, which means the guidance. A guidance, of course, under Islam. It was the Republika Srpska that Izetbegovic published and was translated into English and Serbian and other languages and raised a terrible indignation among all the Yugoslavs about what the Muslim brothers planned to do. During the 30s, there was also major development, which was the collaboration of the Muslim brothers, about these Bosniak Muslims, with the Nazis, first in Cairo, where the Nazis became very strong and very obedient to the Nazi cause in Yugoslavia, in Egypt, and then in Yugoslavia, and therefore the Muslims saw it necessary to strengthen their cause. And during the World War II, the Muslims created a greater Croatia, which included Croatia and Bosnia in collaboration with the Germans. And during the war of World War II, they even established death camps in Bosnia and in Bosnia, mainly the major camp of Jasenovac and the smaller camp of Jadovno, where they exterminated many Serbs mainly, but also Jews and Gypsies. So after World War II, the Bosnians continued, of course, in secret to relate to those Muslim brothers and to strengthen their secret groups within Bosnia, even though it was forbidden by Tito, by the entire era of Tito. And therefore, the war in Bosnia, with which dealt our report, is remembered by the Serbs, who suffered most of this war, was remembered by them as chapter 2 of World War II, when the Bosnians, aided by the Nazis, exterminated 700,000 Serbs and others who were forced to convert into Catholic Christianity like the Bosnians. And therefore, in 1992, when the war started, the Serbs always remembered that they will not let the horrors of World War II in which the Croats were and the Bosnians were allies of the Nazis repeats itself. And therefore, if they were considered to be too hard in the eyes of the allies of NATO and so on towards the Bosnians or the Croatians, they should have remembered why. There was a very big reason why the Bosnians were not exactly ready to repeat the same horrors. So this is the general context in which fundamentalist Islam returned and then continued after the death of Yugoslavia, the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, to continue to bring in volunteers from the Islamic world, mainly from Bosnia or from Afghanistan or from Morocco and Saudi Arabia, who fought with the Bosnian army side by side with the Muslims of Bosnia. And that in itself is a great travesty, because enough that the Western powers were bombing the Serbs, they did not need to bring from the outside also foreign Muslims, which were hostile to the United States of America and to NATO, but nevertheless they employed them, and the West supplied weapons to them in order to help conquer the Serbs. So when you add together all these tremendous forces, you can understand why during the Bosnia War from 1992 to 1925, there was a daily flight coming from Tehran to Sarajevo. Sarajevo, the place where the Serbs suffered the most, as our report shows. And in those flights, I can assure you, the Iranians did not bring suites or nurses. It was full of weapons and of mujahideen, enemies of the Serbs.
You already told us, you already answered to my question, next question about foreign Muslims fighters. Still, if you tell us something more about mujahideens and their participation in civil war in Bosnia and Herzegovina.
Well, I'll add a few more. I said part, but I'll add a few more. You see, during the war, besides the Bosnian forces and the weapons that they got from America and NATO, they constituted a Muslim unit, the Seventh Corps of Muslims, which was constituted both from Bosnian soldiers who were, of course, Muslims, and they were all mobilized to fight against the Serbs and the Western NATO forces and so on, and also from Bosnian groups who were mobilized into the army and fight for the government of Serbians. Now, you have to remember that during World War II, and again, it's a continuation of the same story. During World War II, those Bosnians were mobilized by the great Mufti of Jerusalem, Haj Amil Husseini, who in Palestine in the 30s and 40s fought against the settlement of the Jews in Palestine. And he, together with Hitler, with whom he served, had associated to make a plan for the final solution of the Jews in Palestine. Because they were interested, the Nazis, to finish with the Jews in Europe, and Hamjamil Husseini to eliminate the Jews in Palestine so that the Palestinians can remain alone. And therefore, this contribution, if you like, was common to both the Muslims and the people who came from the outside, and the units of the Muslims, of the Mujahideen who fought. Now, during that fight, they received a lot of weapons from the West. They were particularly cruel towards the death, the extermination, the burning of churches, Serbian churches, of Serbs and all kinds of others. They were also wronged, I have to repeat it, by the Serbs in Srebrenica. I said, we don't spare anybody. What is wrong is wrong. But mainly they contributed to the death and the refusal to stop also the fire when they were asked by the United Nations, and therefore the horror that the Mujahideen, the Islamic forces, again I repeat, coming mainly from Iran, Yemen, Saudi Arabia, Morocco, Tunisia, and Qatar in some way, all of them putting themselves together, they constituted a division of Mujahideen, which is a continuation of the war in World War II, where they helped the Serbian and NATO forces in combating the Serbs. Well,
Some of the conclusions the independent commission has made confirms that the Serbian Christian community in the part of Sarajevo by Muslim control by SDA party was destroyed in totality, a process that was simultaneously accompanied with the two other efforts, dehumanization of the same community and denial of justice for the victims and their families. Can you please elaborate on this process?
Well, that is the most sorrow part of our report, because contrary to the image which speaks about the horrors at the Serbians, so to speak, coming from Banja Luka, made against Sarajevo, that is also partly true, because the Serbs also did many dead and wounded and so on. But the most sorry part is that while the Muslims remained basically in Sarajevo, and they continued to rebuild the city of Sarajevo and restore it and build more mosques and so on and so forth, the population, the Serb population of Sarajevo was completely either compelled to leave, because in the repent refugees, it's tens of thousands, and the number of thousands who died, who were murdered by the Croats and the Muslims in Sarajevo. And therefore you can say that Sarajevo, which was a major city where the three major communities of Yugoslavia shared in peace during the time of Tito, became, as a matter of fact, a Serbian free, like the Juden free of Jews in Europe under the Germans. It was totally complicated, completely complicated. And what is more is that until they evacuated the city, they had the terrible suffering of killing, torturing, raping, and such traumas which are still during these days, after all the tortures that they were submitted to during the war. So it is a saga that did not end there, and that our experts in the commission who examined the post-trauma suffering and also the general suffering of the war keeps repeating and elaborating upon, and we hear really those horrible problems which has marked the major Serbian suffering in the war. And again, I'm saying in order to balance what was attributed together only to the Serbians, but in which definitely there was major contribution by the Muslim Bosnians and the Croats, their allies.
Now, Mr. Israeli, tell us a few words about the overall media interpretation of the events that took place during the civil war in BiH.
Look, one of the sad things is that the media, which was supposed to be, including major media, newspapers, the major newspapers of Europe, like Le Monde in France, the Herald Tribune in England, who were supposed to do investigative reports and to check every event that were triggered by the Serbs in order to verify, so to speak, the travesty of justice that they did, accusing the Serbs, only the Serbs, and even sometimes attributing to the Serbs things that were done by the Muslims, like massacres in entire villages and so on and so forth. Terrible lies. The major newspapers, and I know that from my own experience, because a few years ago I did a report on the major newspapers in the case of fake poisoning by the Palestinians in the West Bank. And it was exactly the same story, without verification, without checking. It's convenient to accuse the Jews, and they accuse the Jews, even though the Jews had nothing to do with them. So in the major analysis that was done by Zakaria, our collaborator, who was a famous journalist in Italy, he examined report by report of all the major newspapers during all the years of the war and found the amount of lies that were just attributed to the Serbs, while as a matter of fact it was the Serbs who suffered from it. And therefore you wonder what are the words of all these famous newspapers, the Herald Tribune or the Times or the Le Monde, who are supposed to be the main newspapers, and it's all documented in our report with the dates, the quotations from the articles and so on. So all what I said here is documented, can be checked by any fair person they want and find that our findings are true.
Can you share your knowledge of the links of the current actual Bosniaks Muslim political elite in Sarajevo, if it exists, of course, with the international extremist network and terrorist infrastructure, and the role and the function of the Sarajevo Bosniak elite in the strategic planning and ultimate goals of the global jihad for Europe?
Yeah, well, of course, since I spoke about what happened in Bosnia during the war and their association with Muslim brothers and so on, this whole action was expanded tremendously because now there are world jihad, which derive, many of them or most of them, from the Muslim Brothers. But in the meantime, we have also Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and others in Afghanistan, in other places. So it became a world network, mostly attributed or linked to the Muslim Brothers, various branches of the Muslim Brothers. So why quietly and under false pretenses, they pretend to be moderate, seeking only peaceful action and so on. They do under the surface, in underground, tremendous alliances with Muslim Brothers, with other groups who undercover go into Bosnia, infiltrate, and other places in Europe. You all remember what happened in France, in Belgium, in England, in Germany, just a few months or 1 year or two ago. It is the same group, international. They have also their branch in Bosnia under the Muslim state. They collaborate with SDA, that party that Izetbegovic had established, and since he died, his son is continuing the leadership of that party. They establish mosques by the help of Saudi Arabia, or with Pakistan, or Turkey now, which has sponsored those groups, with fundamentalist imams who guide those groups, encourage them to go for training in Afghanistan with the groups of Taliban, and then they go back to Bosnia and they continue to build that white association, white platform of these Muslim fundamentalists, headed by Muslim fundamentalist guides and Muslims, in order to build up the platform of the Muslim Brothers under the names of variant charity group, so that they can say, we only distribute aid and charity, never doing criminal things. And so in concert with all this group, they are continuing the task that Izetbegovic did while dying, and what his son is continuing to do today.
Mr. Israeli, Professor Israeli, thank you for participating in... Yes, thank you for participating in our TV program, and I hope that these conclusions...
Already 1 hour? Oh, we did 1 hour?
Almost. So I hope that these conclusions which you came during the research will help to domestic and the world public to understand the extent of suffering Serbs in Sarajevo. Thank you again.
I am at your disposal anytime. Thank you.
Poštovani gledalci, razgovarali smo sa Rafaelom Izraelijem, predsjednikom Nezavisne međunarodne komisije za utvrđivanje stradanja Srba u Sarajevu u periodu 1991-1995. godina. Ja vam se zahvaljujem na pažnji i prijatno večer.